Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is an historic meeting for the approval of federal judges. We're doing things differently today than they've ever been done since I served in the United States Senate. What's happened? Well, a decision was made last week by Attorney General Bondi that the Justice Department would no longer cooperate with the American Bar Association rating process for judicial nominees. What's going on here? Why has this been changed so abruptly? Well, you look back and you can understand it if you look at the history of it. During the first term of Donald Trump, the names were submitted to the American Bar Association of each of his judicial nominees. 9 of those nominees were found unqualified to serve on the federal bench by the American Bar Association. Yet President Trump, in his first term, pursued it anyway. 8 of them ended up being approved for the bench. What is that all about? The American Bar Association has a process of going to the peers and colleagues of the nominees and asking, what was your experience in the courtroom as a judge, as co-counsel, as opposing counsel? What did you think this individual was doing in their professional capacity? Were they prepared for the case? Did they comport themselves honorably? Just basic questions. And the nominees then are subject to rating by the American Bar Association. Qualified, well qualified, unqualified. Under Trump's first term, as I mentioned, 9 or 10 were found unqualified. 8 of them were approved for lifetime appointments to the federal bench. All right, so Durbin, what about your nominees under President Biden? 235 were approved by this committee. Were any of them found unqualified by the American Bar Association? Not one. So the difference is the Attorney General has decided to protect against the vulnerability that some nominees, maybe even some today, might have been found unqualified. I think that's a mistake. I think that kind of professional evaluation, which has been going on under presidents of both political parties for decades, should continue. But the Trump administration, second term, has decided the ABA is no longer welcome to review judicial nominees. That's a mistake. And then there's the Trump administration's rejection of the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society. I asked this question for 20 years, literally 20 years. What's going on here? Why is this the secret handshake of all the Republican nominees, that they belong to the Federalist Society, created by Leonard Leo and others? What does it mean? A lot of the nominees would say, oh, it's just a free lunch. Go and listen to a lecture. It doesn't mean a thing. But it turns out to be a recurring pattern that if you're going to be considered as a serious nominee on the Republican side, you've got to be part of the Federalist Society. But guess what happened just recently? Last week, President Trump wrote on Truth Social, I quote, "I am so disappointed in the Federalist Society because of the bad advice they gave me on numerous judicial nominees," quote unquote from President Trump. He also called one of the organization's longtime leaders, Leonard Leo, quote, "a real sleazebag," close quote, who, quote, "probably hates America," from President Trump's own mouth. Yet during his first presidential campaign, then candidate Trump, quote, said, "We're going to have great judges, conservative, all picked by the Federalist Society." President Trump's mindless inconsistencies are a classic example of situation ethics. But when they toss out the American Bar Association and they toss out the Federalist Society, they don't want anyone looking over the shoulders of the nominees to find out what they believe, what they've said, what they've done. I don't get it. I don't think that's in the best interest of picking the right people for the judiciary of either political party. And then there's this issue that the chairman raised, and he and I are friends, so this is not a personal thing. We have been wrestling with this, at least between us in conversation, for weeks about how to resolve it. Here's what it boils down to. Trump's first term, 94 U.S. attorney appointees, Democrats in majority in the Senate. Boy, that must have been a battle royal. It was not. They were all approved by voice vote in the committee, voice vote on the floor, because that was the custom and practice. We decided that we'd do a background check through the FBI of these U.S. attorney nominees and then basically agreed to them on a bipartisan basis. Things were going along pretty well. I think both political parties felt that it was a fair process. And then something happened. One of the senators from the state of Ohio, J.D. Vance, who went on to become vice president, decided to object to these voice votes on the floor of the United States Senate. So he wanted to put 2 or 3 days of procedure into the choice of each of the U.S. attorneys. It stopped the process. As the chairman just noted, when you start taking 3 days or 4 days for 93 nominees, you start eating up the calendar of the Senate, and they can't do anything else. I appealed to J.D. Vance, then senator at the time, saying, you don't want to do this. To put an end to this process is just not appropriate, and it's not fair to these nominees. You're not objecting to any single person being unqualified. You're saying that every one of Biden's nominees has to go through a 3 or 4 day process on the floor. It's just unmanageable, and it's unreasonable. And guess what? The tables turn. There comes a time when you want to move these by voice vote, and we're going to have to say as Democrats, we're going to follow the Vance precedent. So it isn't just the fact that J.D. Vance started it, but I would go to the floor 4 different times asking for unanimous consent for him to reconsider this position. Don't do this. Stick with the original approach we used under President Trump, the first term, and President Biden as well. He would not budge an inch. And when he was off campaigning for vice president, a group of Republican senators, I'm not going to name names, but they're all a matter of record, joined on the floor to sustain this Vance precedent. I've been saying to Chairman Grassley, you expect me to just look the other way now? U.S. attorneys are coming before us, and I'm supposed to say, well, let's go back to voice votes again. One set of rules for Democrats, another set of rules for Republicans. That's the mess we're in. We can work this out, and we should. I've got a hold on one nominee from Florida. I've spoken to both Florida senators about it. It isn't personal. We've got to find a way out of this that is fair and bipartisan, and that we're going to stick with for both political parties. You just can't change the rules overnight, and that's what we're faced with. So, Mr. Chairman, this is more than just the ordinary meeting of the nominees to be considered by this committee. This is the first time no ABA involvement. The Federalist Society is now a suspect sleazebag group, when it used to be the required approval before anyone's taken seriously, and we still have to resolve the mess left behind by Vice President Vance.